Welcome to the Yukon in North 61. Today I'm going to talk about one of my very favorite calibers, 350 Remington Magnum. Doing some reloading, going out to the range today. We'll take you along. 6 pounds 6 ounces rather. Remington 600. 6 pounds 9 ounces. Remington 660. 8 pounds 5 ounces, and a little bit more for the Winchester 71. In 1998, I lived in Nunavut, up in a place called Pond Inlet, and I got this rifle, and I've been using this rifle ever since, and it's probably my favorite firearm. This is a model 660 in a tremendous caliber 350 Rem Mag, and it's light, it's accurate, highly functional. Lately you've seen me using my Winchester 71 and 348. In some ways these cartridges are quite similar, the 348 and the 350 Rem Mag. They're both short, fat cartridges, so there's the two of them. The big difference is 348 probably has just a tiny bit more capacity. It's a 5110. Neck down. It's got a very fat, but it's very tapered as well, which takes away some of its capacity. But it's only loaded to 38,000 pounds per square inch. This, because it's straight cased, has nearly the same capacity. It's a 35 instead of a 34, and it can be loaded up to 55,000–60,000 pounds per square inch in a modern bolt action, which the Remington 660 and 600 actions are. Okay. One of the things about this Remington 660 is these are dummy rounds. There's no primer, no powder. It's a very reliable functioning. So it's been a very reliable firearm as far as, which is what you want in a cartridge. And part of the reasons that you want a cartridge like this, I use this for caribou. It's not necessary to have a cartridge this powerful for caribou, but I also was in polar bear country. So it was always fun to have the idea that a polar bear would be having trouble if he ran into us and wanted to eat us. Here's a Remington 600. Now, I just got this. I actually traded my Remington 600 in 6mm, which isn't much good for the Yukon. 6mm, it's a little bit, maybe it's a sheet gun, but the 350 is far more versatile. I can use this all the way up to bison. This is the second 600 I've owned, and both of them had the same kind of issue. And the issue is that's good. That's good. That's not so good. That cartridge binds in there. Now if you really ram it, it'll go in, but it's certainly not smooth. That first cartridge off of the right rail doesn't really want to go unless you really give her. If you really give her, it'll go. If you want to operate it slow, it binds. And it binds right there. It doesn't want to go past that lip. This is the second one I've had. Both of them were the same. Let's try to figure out. It's the same action, the 600 and the 660, but there's some slight differences. So let's take a look at those. Okay, I've done some measurements and I've taken a look at this, and I'm pretty confident that I understand the difference, the subtle difference between these two actions, and why a 660 will feed, and why the 600s I have are really chunky feeders. So the big difference is, if you take a look, and I hope you can see this well. Zoom right in here, Jane. There is a little spot here where the lips of the action, where the cartridges spool through, narrows, and back of that is less. So the dimensions of the more open area, which is at the back, is between 0.540 on the 660 and 0.543 on the 600. And that small diameter keeps the cartridges in underneath that, because that's where the cartridge would be. And then where it opens up, this is where the cartridges would feed up from the bottom into the action. So they have to pop free there. If I measure the distance between the action and where that little V is, where there's the transition area, like right about there, that distance, here I got 1.260, but when I measured it more carefully, it's 1.230. So there's a fairly short distance here. That distance is not far enough back. On this action, that starts way back further, that transition area, at 1.630, or about 0.4 inches further back. And that allows those cartridges to, the bolt to work, the belt there, that thick belt, to pop up through there and not bind. So I think it's going to be a fairly simple operation using my old axe file and a bit of confidence, maybe a Dremel tool, to move that area back and make this firearm function like it's supposed to. And they figured that out between the 600 and the 660. They figured out how to make these feed. I traded my 6mm 600 for this. I'm willing to bet that the 6mm had similar dimensions. So I think they used the same dimensions as they did for the 308 and 6mm base cartridges for the 350, and it had trouble with that final round. And the first one that I had, I actually traded it away because I didn't like that feeding. So this one, instead of trading away, I'm going to try to fix it, because it is 4 ounces lighter. It is a little bit handier for canoe use, and that it would be good, but I'll never be satisfied if it's got that kind of terrible feeding, because you could end up being in a fight with a bear. And I don't trust myself to be so calm that I'm going to remember exactly the special way of slamming that last round. Maybe adrenalized I would, but maybe I'm in my sleeping bag and whatever. I'd rather have it work the way it's supposed to work. The other difference between these two is Remington reduced the height of the follower. So these original followers, that follower height is 3.350, and it barely gets down low enough to get 3 rounds in. This follower in the 660 is 0.325. So they made some very subtle, the angles seem very, very similar though, so I'm not as worried about that, except to note that you barely get 3 rounds into this 600, where this one, the 3 rounds fit and you got a little bit of play. Better follower. I might see if I can get a follower from Western Gun Parts and modify it, or if I'm lucky I'll get one that's already a little bit smaller. So I'm going to try to make this a firearm work. The other thing is I wanted to talk a little bit about bullets for the 350, and I have shot almost every bullet known to man with the 350, and where I've settled on 200 grain bullets for the Model 71, because I can get them up to that 2,500 feet per second. I can get 250 grain bullets up to 2,500 feet per second, or very, very close to it, with 748 powder, and they're so accurate. Nothing else seems to shoot better than the old Spears, which are here. Unless, that's the Spear 250 grain hot core. It's got a ballistic coefficient of 446, so when you start these off at around 2,500 feet per second, they hang on to speed right out to 300 yards. Unless you can find the old Barnes originals. And these Barnes originals are a great bullet, and oh, this box has not been opened yet. I've got about 3 boxes of these. I guard them jealously. They're very blunt. You've got a very blunt Spitzer shape, so you can load them close to the rifling, and for whatever reason I think that makes them shoot just as well as the Spears. But you know what, these Spears pretty good, usually hang together, and they will expand down to fairly low velocities. It's a nice, soft, kind of clinging together type bullet. So I'm going to try to fix this 600, and I'll come back and show you how it's working after I do so. This has been always the most accurate bullet. That's the 250 Spear, and it gives decent penetration. Usually hangs together pretty well.
And the other thing I like about it is it expands good. Expands well at low velocities.
Okay, I'm doing the first check, and oh, you can see it's better, but it's still binding right there, but less. I'm on the right track. I'll take a little more material off. It's kind of scary. Using my 660 as a guide and screwing up my courage. That no longer binds. I can do it slow or I can do it fast. So let's put all three in and see how she works. So by the time they did the 660 and maybe the later 600s, they had that figured out, but these early 600s didn't. You can pick up a 600 probably that has feeding problems, and it's not a hard fix. So there's a little hesitation there, maybe just a slight bit of polishing, and I'm golden. So let's take this out to the range and see how it works. First shot with the new 600. This has got just a regular stock that's painted, not the candy stripe stock. Okay. You know you're shooting something when you're shooting 6 1/4 pounds